And that brings me to our opening keynote speaker. Karch and I first struck up our friendship several years ago at a conference at MIT. We hit it off immediately and quickly discovered that although we came from very different worlds, we were asking many of the same questions. By the end of the first conference, he said something that I've never forgotten. He said, "Alok, I know this probably isn't cool to say these days, but I love hanging out with Indians because they're never afraid to sit in the front row." And funny enough, that's exactly where we met. Over the course of our friendship, we found ourselves returning to many of the same questions, not necessarily about technology itself, but about its implications. What does it mean for people, for institutions, for society, for the future we're trying to build? What fascinated me was that we arrived at many of these same questions from very different directions. My perspective has been shaped by years of working with the United Nations, governments, humanitarian response, and international development. Karchi's perspective was shaped by medicine, surgery, innovation, and caring for patients. And whether that was a patient that was sitting on an operating table in California, or carrying a severely injured survivor on his back to safety through the aftermath of a natural disaster halfway around the world. Yet we repeatedly found ourselves returning to the same conclusion. The real challenge isn't building better technology. It's ensuring technology helps us become better humans. That philosophy has been reflected throughout his career. Now, to be fair, if you look at his resume, it's a bit underwhelming. He was among the first physicians on site at Ground Zero following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He's led surgical teams in disaster zones and underserved regions from around the world. His humanitarian work has been recognized by US presidents, the United Nations, and multiple foreign governments. Today, he stands at the intersection of medicine, innovation, entrepreneurship, AI, and ethics. He's also the author of a book, several books, but the latest one, The Paradox of Progress, The Roses and Thorns of Artificial Intelligence, which explores many of the same questions we'll be discussing throughout this summit. I have to laugh. He's been a team physician for the US ski team for 20 years and completed only 59 marathons, including a solo, unsupported, multi-day ultra run across the John Muir Trail. And for those of you who aren't in the know, that's a highly specialized, extremely grueling wilderness challenge where participants run the trail's 211 to 223 miles completely alone while carrying all of their own supplies from start to finish with absolutely zero external aid. And if that's not enough, he's a two-time finisher of the Badwater 135-mile ultramarathon across Death Valley, often regarded as the toughest human endurance foot race on Earth. The list goes on. But honestly, none of that really impresses me. I play old man Division III soccer on Sunday nights. And we drink beer in the parking lot afterwards. That's real endurance. No, what impresses me about Karchi is this. He's always there when people need him. Whether that's responding to humanitarian crisis and natural disasters halfway around the world, helping patients through some of the most difficult moments of their lives, or helping a friend who's gotten himself into some serious hot soup by agreeing to chair an AI summit. When I panic called him and told him I needed help, he didn't ask about speaker fees, didn't ask about travel costs, didn't ask about accommodations. The only thing he asked was two things: where and when. And that tells you just about everything you need to know about the man. Most importantly, he brings a perspective that reminds us that behind every algorithm, every model, every breakthrough, and every innovation, there are people, their hopes, their challenges, their dignity. and our responsibility to ensure that in the next chapter of progress, humans remain the protagonists. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Dr. Michael Karch.
All right. Well, I want to tell my version of that MIT meet story, if you don't mind. So Alok and I did meet at MIT at a conference, and we were standing in the back of the auditorium. And we realized that there were only 2 seats left, just 2 in the front row. And what I didn't know about Alok, but I found out later, is that he's a front row guy, and I'm a front row guy. And so we kind of looked at each other, we eyed each other, and took off. And he took off on the right wing of the auditorium, and I took off on the left wing of the auditorium. And as Canadians do, he went elbows high, and he hockey checked a guy into the wall and made it there first. And as Americans do, I ran over everybody that was in the way, knocked over a little old lady, broke her hip, fixed it, and then charged her at the end. And we made it. And so we became friends ever since, sitting in the front row. And I'm extremely proud of Alok, and I'm extremely proud of New Brunswick and all of you for what you're doing. As a token of that, when I was walking to the Congress Hall this morning, I picked up this small little Canadian maple leaf. I was born in Canada, little known fact, in Ottawa. My parents were there and then moved to the States. And I got to say, I'm incredibly proud of you and what you're doing. In this province and in this country, you have a national strategy for artificial intelligence, for research and development, which almost no other country has. And you've got this little hotspot here in New Brunswick. And so good on you. Good on you. I'm really proud of it, and just happy to be here and honored to be here, Alok, so thank you. I hope you're not squeamish, because we're going to start out with, can we get the volume up? We're going to start out with a little bit of hip surgery. This is a navigational device that we use in surgery for hip replacement. Switch out. And what we can say, across, I think, any spectrum of technology now is that the outcomes in any sector are much better today than they were just a few years ago. In fact, just a few years ago, this was unimaginable. This is a knee replacement just 6 weeks out from surgery. And I think what we have to realize as tech junkies, as I think everybody in this room probably is that although the technology is great, what's really behind the technology is human creativity and human ingenuity and human drive.
Come on, Dane! Come on, buddy! Here we go!
Right on you from that.
Here we go! Up, 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 up!
And it doesn't matter if it's in athletics or if in theater or literature or engineering or science. Humans are at the start of it. And so I thought that maybe we would start today with something that is uniquely human, and that is art. And so if you look on this picture on the left, this is a Rembrandt, Dutch artist from the 17th century. The painting is called The Anatomy Lesson. And if you went to medical school, this is a very important painting to us because it teaches us that before you help others, you have to understand yourself first. You have to understand the human condition first. And if you look at Rembrandt, he's in his 30s at this time. You can see that his painting is very good, but he's still a little bit rough around the edges. Look at the hands. They're not perfect. And then we look just 30 years later at a master, at an expert painter, and we see the progression of expertise, of human expertise over time in what's called the Draper's Guild. We see later in his career at age 55, he's the first probably known selfie. He does a selfie of himself, and we see what a human actually looks like without testosterone or estrogen replacement, without sports shakes, and without gym memberships. But that's what we look at in 1659. Anyone want to take a guess as to what year this painting was made on the right? In 2016. 2016. So this was part of what's called the Microsoft Azure project. And what they did, data scientists, was they took all of Rembrandt's 346 paintings and they datafied it. They took distances between the nose and the mouth and the ears and his color palettes, and they datafied this, and then they asked the computer in an algorithmic form, what would the next painting be that Rembrandt would make? And this is what it came up with. And so this brings us to this very interesting intersection between time and space, where humans begin to ask questions they've never really asked before. You know, what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be a musician? What does it mean to be a factory worker? What does it mean to be a surgeon? What does it mean to be a human?
Thank you for inviting me. I am thrilled and honored to be here at the United Nations. The UN is one of humanity's greatest accomplishments, representing a democratic union of nations that are working together for the benefit of all. I am here to help humanity create the future.
Machines across the board are coming to life. When will they come to life as complete organisms? We don't know that. However, when they do, I want to make sure that they care about us, that they embody the best of human values and not the worst. This is the quest. We've got to find a way to do better, to be the best that we can be, and to make machines that reflect the best of who we can be.
Okay, Sophia, I think you're ready.
So how does that make you feel? Does that excite you? Does that scare you? Are you somewhere in between? And so this is, I think, the central tension of our time. I think we're actually truly in a place where we are at the same time better and worse than we ever have been before. And so are we losing something, or are we discovering something? That's where we are right now. At MIT, I attended a lecture by Peter Lee, a very famous person. I'm sure you know who he is. And somebody asked a very simple question, and that is, where are we now with humanity? And his response was very interesting. He said, imagine a universe where every single household in that universe is lit by candlelight. Candlelight. He said, and then imagine that somebody discovers something called copper wire. And they discovered that that copper wire carries this thing called electricity very, very fast. He said, and then what you have is multi-billion-dollar companies tripping over each other, pushing each other out of the way, and multi-trillion-dollar countries, namely two of them, US and China, doing the same thing to spread copper wire to every single household in the land. But then he said, but here's the thing. Nobody's invented the light bulb yet. And that's kind of where we are with artificial intelligence right now. So I think that before we start this talk, in all fairness to a scientific community, we should identify my biases towards artificial intelligence. And I tend to skew to the middle. On one side, I think that artificial intelligence has enormous potential to solve some of humanity's blind spots and problems and make us better. On the other side of the spectrum, I'm very concerned about things like security and privacy and digital divides and government intervention and oversight. But what I'm most concerned about is that we don't pay attention, that we are so preoccupied with our games and our gadgets and our phones and our politics that we miss this enormous opportunity to shape our future, that we miss this moment. What I'm showing you here is a graph of what are called general purpose technologies in the Industrial Revolution: electricity, power, mass production at scale. And for the first time in the blue graph, humans, or normal humans, everyday humans, understand this word called convenience. For the first time, we experience convenience. And it's a good thing. Technology brings some good things. But there are some unintended consequences to this. The environment takes a hit for the first time and continues to take a hit. There's mass migration from the farms to the cities, and there's overcrowding, there's disease, there's cholera, there's typhus. There's a class separation between the haves and the have-nots, the industrialists and the workers. And from that class separation come a separation of ideas, new ideas, communism, fascism, socialism versus capitalism. And from those separation of ideas come not one but two world wars. And from those two worlds come a third Cold War and all the proxy wars that we continue to fight today. And so technology brings some very good things, but there are some unintended consequences that we need to think about as we move forward on our technology curves. What I'm showing you in the right is the technology curve that we're sitting on today. Artificial intelligence, robotics, biogen, biotech. And so the question I have for you today is, now that we're on this second curve and we don't know where it goes, we can just see the trajectory. Does this represent a second chance to go back and look at the mistakes, the unintended consequences that were made in the last century, and make a change? Ultimately, I think in a very simplistic form that artificial intelligence is just one tool in a long line of tools that humans have made to augment themselves. When we couldn't chop down a tree with our hands, we built an axe. And from the axe came the hammer. And from the hammer came the gun. And from the gun came propulsion. And from propulsion came a jet. And from a jet came a trip to Mars. When we couldn't travel long distances, we harnessed a horse. And from the horse came leather technology and iron technology and building, construction, and then the car, and then the autonomous car. And so this cycles the innovation cycle ourselves. But like all power tools, if we know how to pick them up, and we know how to use them, and we know what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, we can build some beautiful things. But if we don't read the instructions for use and we don't understand them, we can cut our hands off. And this is the concern for today, because this is probably the most powerful power tool we've ever created as a species. And so I think really where we are, this inflection point, is a very interesting inflection point in human history, because up until this time, for the last 15,000 years, we have been augmenting the human hand. And now we are starting to augment the human mind. It's going to change the way we think, it's going to change the way we decide, the way we learn, the way we communicate, and most importantly, what we do and what we don't trust. We have some cognitive deficits that we could use these tools to overcome. Emily, what do you think? What's the emotion? Anger. Really? Okay. Because to me, it looks like she just kicked the winning goal in the World Cup soccer game. Or maybe she's delivering her first child. There's 7 basic human emotions, and we continue to screw them up. If we had a tool to help us decipher human emotions, I have two daughters, they're now in their 20s, but when they were in their teenage years, if I had a tool to decipher their emotions, I'd be in a lot better place, right? Okay, so maybe we create some tools to help us with that, because that's a cognitive deficit of humans that we struggle with. What do you think? Is he a winner or is he a loser?
I'd say lose.
He's a loser. Well, to me, it depends, because if I'm flying into Vegas on a Friday, everybody around me is a winner, right? But if I lose and I fly home on a Sunday, everybody's got to be a loser. So the environment changes how we look at things too, right? This is a cognitive bias of our own, okay? A data set, 20 rows, 20 columns, pretty small, right? I want you in 5 seconds to summarize that data set, right? Tell us what it's about and graph it. Go ahead. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Can you do it? Can anyone do it? Tableau does it in 3 seconds. Okay, so maybe there are some tools that we can use to compensate for our cognitive deficits. And, it's said that humans make about 50 mistakes every day. Now, most of them are minor mistakes. We leave our keys in the freezer or something like that. They don't matter. But can we capitalize on the important mistakes, because we make big mistakes as humans? $200 million tons of crushed concrete, enough to pave a sidewalk from Washington, D.C. to New York City, 8 inches thick and 8 feet wide. Dust so thick you couldn't see the hands in front of your face. And in that dust were 2 million tons of deadly asbestos. There have been more rescue workers that have died in the last 25 years from asbestos exposure than actually died on that day. In that dust were shoes, brown shoes, black shoes, white shoes, dress shoes, and all around those shoes were bodies without shoes. They'd been blown off in the explosion. This was the scene at Ground Zero on 9/11. I arrived in New York City early that morning, right after it happened. I was in DC. When the Pentagon got hit, I was a chief resident. At that time, I was in my PGY 7 year. I was at the end of my training. The Pentagon got hit right across the river. I heard the explosion. We were called to our battle stations, if that's the way you want to call it. And because of a disaster plan in DC, all the river bridges were shut down and the Pentagon was on one side and all the trauma hospitals were on the other side. Now everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face. And we received one patient. And I was incredibly frustrated. I was at the peak of my training. This was the moment I had trained for not 7, but probably 11 years, including medical school. And I did something very, very irrational. I left the hospital in the midst of a national crisis in the nation's capital. I went home. I packed a backpack full of dressings and gear, a water filter, a sleeping bag. I hopped in a cab because the trains were shut down to Baltimore, and then I jumped the last train to New York because I wanted to help. And I got assigned to an ice rink, Chelsea Pier, and at that time the plan was to put body parts out into the ice. I went to the bathroom. It was a hockey rink, and on my way to the bathroom, I saw that there was a pair of fireman's gear hanging over the wall of the ice rink. And when I came back, they asked for physicians to go to the front. That's what they called it, the front, but the requirement was you needed fire gear. And that's probably the only thing I've ever stolen in my life, and I became one of the first physicians at Ground Zero. This was my MASH unit. K-MASH stands for Karch MASH that I set up underneath that pipe. I thought that was a safe place to put people if they survived. There were survivors. We did pull out one gentleman, and I dragged him over there. I was working at an operational pace that I had never encountered before. I couldn't see, you couldn't hear. It was scary. I was afraid for my own life, and I thought that was a safe place to put him, and it was, until the wall fell down on him. And he became a statistic that I think about each day. I spent the next 15 years doing international disaster relief, probably to try and make up for some of the mistakes that I had made. And the one thing I've seen some of the best humanity in some of the worst places on Earth and some of the worst times on Earth, but when I go back and reflect on those experiences, what I come to every time, is that humans are consistently inconsistent. We make mistakes. And so can we generate a tool to compensate for some of these cognitive mistakes? These mistakes are costly, not just in money, they're costly in time, and they're costly in lives. And so what would it take for us to meet this moment? What would it take for us to do it right this time? Well, I think the first thing is to recognize the power of this tool that we're using and who it affects. This was a rescue effort in Super Typhoon Haiyan. I formed a nonprofit organization after 9/11 dedicated to responding to disaster relief, basically a strike team that got there within the first 24 hours. That was our mission. We got to Super Typhoon Haiyan, which is the largest storm on record at that time, way ahead of the curve. And we were put on this remote beachhead, so to speak. We got there ahead of anybody else, and the Philippine military actually forgot about us. We worked for a week on the mayor's desk because that was the only building in town that was still standing in a town of 100,000. We had enough equipment for about 80 surgical cases, but we did 184 surgical cases. We spread our equipment out. As team leader, I had to make the difficult decision about 6 days in to close down operations because we had no more equipment left. And there were lines of refugees waiting to be treated, and we had to shut down. And right as I was about to make that decision, our last patient was a child that you'll see in this video. There were bright lights. Realized we had no power, we had no electricity, we had no water. There were bright lights, and there were TV cameras, and a news crew showed up. And so
we begin tonight with, again, this desperate situation in the Philippines. As of now, the good news is 33 nations have joined in the relief operation, pledging almost $100 billion so far. But the problem increasingly is getting there with help, with supplies, with people, and then fanning out. New pictures show the area we've been concentrating on, the city of Tacloban, before and after this typhoon. And pictures taken at the airport just today show the crush of people, all victims, all awaiting an airlift out of there, or in some cases, just fresh water or food. We're going to begin tonight with the reporting of Dr. Nancy Snyderman, who today traveled by chopper to an area on the eastern edge of the Philippines that we so far have not seen since the storm. And the people there are so desperate. As you'll see, our crew was concerned their helicopter would be mistaken for a relief flight when it landed and quickly surrounded.
A younger version of me will be in a baseball hat and a headlamp. Much younger version.
The town of Tanawan is almost gone. It is a place that for the most part has escaped the world's attention. It is foodless, waterless, and increasingly lawless.
We're making a group decision right now whether this is safe enough for us to proceed or not.
Okay, thank you. So we decided to stay away from the crowds and touch down in a remote spot.
Everyone's saying that they need food and water. And this area looks more devastated to me than anything we've seen in Tacloban.
Immediately, we were surrounded.
Everybody here has told me that the American doctors are at a clinic down here, so these good people are going to show us the way. So we sat down, we're thronged by very nice, kind people who basically said they have buried so many, they're hungry, they're thirsty, and then a man came forward and offered us a ride, and it happens to be a policeman named Raul. So Raul right now is taking us into town where we believe there are American doctors who've set up a MASH unit.
And then we find it. City Hall, badly damaged, and now functioning as the local hospital.
Guys, can I get that set of gloves up?
Inside, American doctors and veterans from across the country are feverishly working. Wooden desks serve as operating room tables and flashlights as overhead lights.
I've never been in a war, but this is what I imagine it's like.
Patients are everywhere.
How's she feeling?
Including
okay?
this elderly woman who had her leg amputated yesterday.
I'm sorry.
The work is nonstop. Doctors haven't slept in 4 days.
To fix this, the surgeons are going to have to clean it up.
Upstairs, Dr. Sarah May from Seattle treats an 8-year-old girl whose leg was cut by flying debris.
Unfortunately, we've been doing procedures like this every day. We let them wake up, we dress the wound, we give them the 1 day of antibiotics that we have, and all we can do is have them come back.
What's up there?
Just have them come back.
Have them come back the next day.
You need Cipro, Keflex, ketamine.
Antibiotics, anesthetics, even dressings are in short supply.
We're cutting our dressings into 24 one towel. We're cutting into 24 dressings so that we have enough rations to get through, but we need some supplies quickly. Okay, so we were desperate. We were out of supplies. We were shutting down, and there were hundreds of patients to treat. The very next day, a D9 excavator plowed the road from Tacloban to Tanawan, which is 17 miles, full of debris, and this showed up. This was rice, this was supplies, this was water, and we were back up in operation again. And how did that happen? That happened through Facebook. And so for me, that was the first kind of proof of concept of how powerful this tool is and what it can do. You know, in North America, we use Facebook to take pictures of dessert on our birthday, and we send it to our friends. In developing countries, that's how they receive news. In disasters, that's how they stayed alive. This is an incredibly powerful tool. But as we develop it, we can't create a digital divide between the haves and the have-nots, between the developed countries and the non-developed countries. We have to keep that in mind. And even more specific to the point, in a place like this, we can't have technology develop in a place like here, but 100 kilometers north in rural areas, they don't have it. So we have to keep that powerful tool in mind, and we have to keep the equity of that tool in mind as well. This is an incredibly powerful tool, a flywheel. So we get structured data or unstructured data. We learn from that data. We improve our systems. We attract more customers, if you will, if that's the way you want to look at it, and then we extract more data from that. And that data flywheel is, without question, the most powerful power tool that humankind have ever created. Airbnb does not own one house. Uber does not own one car. Netflix does not have one brick and mortar. Amazon owns everything. Okay? What these people have done is collect data. They've collected data on you, and they've collected data on themselves, and that's how they become so powerful. They rank 6.5 in the world indexes of countries in terms of economic base. They sit between Great Britain and France, those 4 countries together. Right? This is an incredibly powerful tool. And so how do we meet this moment? First and foremost, we have to understand how powerful that tool is. And second, we have to make sure that it's equitably distributed. How do we meet this moment? We have to change our mindset from know-it-all to learn-it-all. In other words, the second you walk across that stage and get your degree, you are by definition, in my book at least, out of date. Out of date. That's how fast this train is moving. When I was in training, after medical school, after intern year, after residency, after fellowship, I did what's called an apprenticeship with a master surgeon by the name of Jeff Mast. Jeff Mast is a world-known hip surgeon. I trained with him for 3 years in my 30s. And Jeff came up to me one day and said, there's this new procedure, this is in the early 2000s, called an anterior hip replacement. He said, I think we should learn it. And at that time, I was in my early 30s. I had just had my 3rd child. I was taking every other night call. My wife is a physician, and I was going through board collection. And honestly, the last thing I wanted to do at that point was learn something new. I was done learning, right? I've been learning for the last 35 years. Jeff, who is 57, at that time, he's my age right now, wanted to learn this. And I shut it down in my mind. It was already a done deal as far as I was concerned. A few days later, I was in the emergency room late at night. I saw something that I hadn't seen before. I walked across the street to our library. It was about midnight, and there was one light on in the library. And Jeff, at age 57, was sitting there, a master surgeon, world-renowned surgeon, reading the anatomy of the hip from the front instead of from the back. And I learned something that day, and that is that we never stop learning. We did the first anterior hip in California, in our region of California. A few days later, it took us 5 hours. It takes about 50 minutes today. But the point is that we never know it all. We always just want to learn it all. And so what Jeff was really teaching me is this old economics principle called Schumpeter's principle, and that is that we have to kind of creatively destroy a part of ourselves in order to grow, right? We have to go backwards in order to go forwards. And this is defined in what's called a Hamby curve. In other words, we escalate on our knowledge curve, on our technique curve, on our skill set, and then we allow ourselves to go backwards and become learners again so that we can escalate even further. And that's the way we have to meet this moment in terms of technology. If you're going to be a technologist, you can never stop learning. It's just moving way too fast. How else can we meet this moment? Well, technology advances at the speed of code, but trust advances at the speed of understanding. So logistic regression, linear regression, multivariate regression, stochastic gradients, gradient boost, random forest. These are all words that we like to say. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel smart. But honestly, it scares the crap out of everybody else. I mean, it really does. And if we really want this to be adopted, our ideas, we have to learn how to speak and how to translate these ideas to the common person. So when you go home for Thanksgiving, when you go home for Christmas, you need to have a bunch of use cases in very simplified terms that you can talk to a carpenter about, you can talk to a teacher about, you can talk to a factory worker about, because they're the ones that are scared of their jobs. They're scared of you. You intimidate them, and we have to realize this. When I wrote this book, The Paradox of Progress, and started researching some things, I saw some astonishing numbers. 86% of the employees have feared job loss at this point. You may be one of them, right? And this is not new. If we look back throughout history, look at the printing press with Gutenberg. When Gutenberg invented the printing press, people hated it. The church and the state destroyed it. Right? They smashed it, they burned it, because they were afraid of what that might do. And the people grabbed onto that. They were afraid of it as well, even though it had the power to democratize education. When Otto Benz invented the car in 1898, they laughed at him. They said it's going to cause mass accidents in the street. It's going to scare the horses. You know what? They were right. It did scare the horses, and it did cause mass accidents. In 1898, there was no such thing as a motor vehicle death. By 1930, there were 30,000 a year in America alone. And then what did we do? We innovated around that problem. We created better intersections. We created something called the stoplight. We created something called the seatbelt. We created something called the airbag and then the autonomous car. And this is the innovation cycle. But we have to be very wary of, as technologists, of how we speak, right? And so we really want to climb that mountain as fast as we can, but we want to stop, we want to turn down, we want to pull up humanity with us. That's the only way this is going to work. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about exploitation and exploration and evolving. I went back to school in my mid to late 50s, so the Harvard Data Analytics program and the MIT Machine Learning program. My favorite professor, without question, is Michael Tushman. He wrote this book called Lead and Disrupt. You should read it. He studies societies, and he basically says that there are three types of societies throughout human history. The societies that just exploited what they were good at, societies that explored constantly, and then those that were kind of a hybrid mix. And so if you look at societies that just exploited what they were good at, they look kind of like this, right? Blockbuster, Taxi, BlackBerry, your kids will never know what those multi-billion-dollar companies were because they never had any exploration to their component. They only exploited what they were good at. On the flip side of things are societies that just explore, that every new shiny thing is what they go after. We don't even remember their names, right? They fell off a cliff somewhere in caveman days, okay? But the societies that survive are the ones that have this perfect hybrid of exploiting what they're good at and then exploring into something new. It's almost like a caveman taking 9 berries of something that they know and picking one new berry and putting it into the mix. You're either going to create something that's going to upset your stomach, but it won't kill you, or you're going to create something beautiful, right? Exploit and explore. Okay.
My name is Steve
Go back
Klassen.
just one second. This gentleman came to me in my practice. This is a very, very well-known snowboarder, Steve Klassen. There's two very well-known snowboarders, Jake Burton and Steve Klassen. They basically founded the sport. He came to me in my practice 15 years ago, somewhere in that ballpark, with a very unusual problem. He had a very bad hip. It needed to be replaced. But at age 54, he had just gotten an invite to compete in the Verbier World Cup in Switzerland as the oldest person ever to compete. In fact, he was 2 to 3 times older than the rest of the competitors. His hip was in horrible shape. The competition was in 5.5 months. And as soon as he said that, I wanted to vomit because there was no way that I was going to be able to accomplish that task. And you know, he's such a motivating guy, and he's such a big, larger than life figure in our mountain world that I started exploring a little bit as to what I could do, how I could augment myself with technology. Right around that time, the FDA had just cleared a navigational device for hip surgery. I made a couple phone calls, and I practiced on a couple cadaver labs and then decided to use it on him. And you got to understand, it's an extremely intimidating thing to use new technology on a world-famous athlete because it's going to be in every social media feed, in every newspaper, and every powder magazine out there if it doesn't work. Okay, so this case scared me probably more than any other case I've ever done. And what you'll see in this next video is a combination of exploitation of something that I knew how to do really well and exploration in new technology. You'll see me using a goniometer, which was invented in 1538, right? It's a very simple device to measure angles. And then I literally turn around and use the newest technology available in the world.
My name is Steve Klassen. I live in Mammoth Lakes, California. I've been here right around 30 years now. I have owned Wave Rave Snowboard Shop the entire time and had a professional snowboarding career going during most of that time. At the beginning of last summer, I was skateboarding and I was noticing I was losing range of motion in my hip. And I've had a hip dislocation 8 years ago. And in the last 3 years or so, I've noticed some deterioration in certain performance parts of my hip. After one day skateboarding, when it really hurt, I decided to go to the hospital. And upon getting that first x-ray, Tim Kroll told me that I needed to get a hip replacement. I spoke to Dr. Karch about the fact that I had a wild card for the Verbier Extreme freeride competition this year, and that I wanted to compete. That's one of the reasons I scheduled it in September, and that he wanted to schedule it in September, because he told me that he believed that at about 2 months post I could get up on the mountain and start riding mellowly, and that at 3 months I could do whatever I wanted. And so I told him I wanted to do this competition, and both of us thought it would be just an amazing thing if I was able to recover enough just to post a score. And I remember being wheeled into the surgery room, and I was out, a minute later. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the recovery room, and from the moment I woke up, my hip felt better. It just simply felt better, and it was a certain pain had just vanished from it. The ache had just vanished, and yeah, I'm very glad that I did it.
And here we have, I hope you saw the pre-show, Steve Klassen. If not, have a look at the age number. It's 5 and 4, and this is incredible. He has a few gray hair that already started when he competed here, because he competed 18 times. It's his 18th time here on the Bac des Roses.
Dr. Karch had confidence in me and had confidence in my ability to make the right decisions for my training. And he said, train as hard as you can, go hard on it. And so I did. And that confidence, working back and forth like that, really helped me get to where I needed to be.
Going for a huge clip and stomping it clean. Are you kidding me, Steve?
I am just so grateful for modern medicine when it comes to being able to do these things. I've had an ACL replacement. I now have a hip replacement, and it's letting me go do everything I want to do still. It's amazing.
And he still got it. It's unbelievable.
So steep and technical in here. I think the camera angle doesn't quite do it justice.
I got to do that competition. I got to stick an air that I've looked at for 25 years and finally got to land it. I exceeded my expectations in terms of my performance and just how I felt health-wise. I mean, my hip feels stronger than it's felt in years. Overall, just overjoyed. The pain's gone, the strength is there. I am so looking forward to this summer. We've got 4 kids skate camps. They're each 3 days long. I'm going to be out there. I feel like I can skateboard better than I have in 5 years, just because my hip feels awesome now. What they can do with replacing joints now is amazing, because I could get my shoulder replaced, I could get my knee, hip, I could get all those replaced if I had to in my life. And who knows, I may have to, but we can just keep on going. And it's awesome that we can get this done right here at Mammoth Hospital, and they're so good at it. They're good at it there.
He's at the end of the going for a 360 over the ledge. Sorry to not finish my sentences.
We're too
this
excited.
Is mind-blowing of the 54-year-old Steve Klassen.
Wow, really impressive stuff, making light work of the gnarly venue. Steve Klassen cruising on down now.
Just if you're on the couch or anywhere you're watching, please stand up. But this was unbelievable, unprecedented stuff.
Okay, so exploit and explore. It's worked for societies for thousands of years. It's worked for individuals. It works in our code. If you think about reinforcement learning, right? We have an exploit and explore weighted function, right? And so the optimal algorithm would be the one that optimizes those 2 variables. And that's how the machines learn. That's how we learn. So think about that as we meet this moment. How else can we meet this moment? I want to talk a little bit about ethical structure. And so,
okay, so we had that knee that was grossly unstable and bent
turn that
all
up
the way
just a
back
little bit?
here. And now with the robot, we're able to straighten that leg out, and it doesn't bend into wrecker bottom, reverse curve, and it's much more stable for her, right? That's the advantage of the robot. Okay. Good.
So robotic technology is incredible technology. It's taken our level in surgery to such a higher level in the last few years. But the question I have for you is, should we stop there? Right? Is it good enough? And that's the question we have to ask as technologists. When is good enough? When do we stop pushing? All right? And I think, personally, the most dangerous moment in technology is when we stop asking what could be better. But that has to be countered against the other. We can't become obsessed with a society, with building technology just because it's possible. And this goes to Alok's video. Just because it's possible, does that mean it's good? Does that mean it brings value? And so these two tensions, these two things have to create a tension between each other as we create our technology. And maybe we think about it this way. You know, every single generation has been posed with a question. Some generations are asked to defend. Some generations are asked to rebuild. Some generations are asked to protest. Is our generation the one that's asked to preserve, right? Are we being asked to preserve our environment? Are we being asked to preserve the workforce? Are we being asked to preserve simple things like conversations at our dinner table? Because there's a third party there now. This is different. And so I think that's the big question for our generation. And how do we structure that? How do we do that well? Maybe we go back to this exploit and explore function and we say, you know what, there are some ethical principles that have been around for 3,000 years. And they've worked in societies. And maybe we exploit that and then explore our technology around that infrastructure, around that scaffolding. And so I'll introduce this to you if you're not familiar with it. If you're Persian, you probably are very familiar with it because it was taught to you, and that's good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. This is a principle which has been around for 3,000 years as an ethical principle, good thoughts. The technology that we create should benefit the human, and it should benefit the earth. That's a good thought. Good words. It needs to be trustable. It needs to be transparent. We need to be able to interrogate it. We can't manipulate the data to our benefit and to the lack of someone else. And good deeds, when we finally do create that technology, we test it and we say, did it create opportunity for others? And if it didn't, that means we iterate and make it better. That's a good ethical structure which we can exploit and then explore our technology afterwards. That's how we meet this moment. And finally, I want to end tonight talking about some things that we never talk about at a technology conference, but we do talk a lot about in medicine, and that's ownership and ego and legacy.
I arrived in Nepal in 2015, just after the earthquake hit, maybe 24, 30 hours after. And we flew out towards the Annapurna region where we were working. And our mission at that point was strictly reconnaissance. Just to find out, what villages were damaged and to land very quickly and get home before it was dark. I was sitting in the co-pilot seat with the pilot, and behind me were two young Nepalese girls, probably 15, 16 at tops. And they were both singing and crying at the same time. So I could talk to the pilot, and I said to him, why are they singing? And his response was to hold back their tears. And I asked the next logical question, which was, well, why are they crying? And his response was, they've lost everything. Well, why are they here? And his response was really profound. And it really kind of served the base of the book, Tangible Heroes, which I wrote. And he said, it's now their purpose. He said, the earthquake has wakened us all to what's important, and it's their purpose now to help. And I responded, they're heroes. These two are heroes. What are their names? And he said, their names don't matter. What matters is the legacy that they're passing on, and the legacy of their mother and their father. Their mother was a nurse. Their father was a teacher. And so we flew over this destroyed village, and then we landed 2,000 feet up on the mountainside. Our mission was recon only, just to see what the destruction was and to put that village on a map, on a GPS map for the next day. When we landed, the two young girls immediately went to work, and they started asking the questions that they were supposed to ask. How many lives were lost? How many were injured? Do you have food? Do you have water? And an elderly looking woman came up to the young girls and said, my husband is trapped down in the village 2,000 feet below. He's been hit by rockfall. He's paralyzed. Can you save him? Knowing what had just happened to these two girls with their mother and father and brother being killed 48 hours before, and here they were helping. I tried to convince the pilot to let me go down to get him. And the woman had told us he was only 15 minutes downhill. And so I convinced the pilot to let me go get him. And the pilot gave me 1 hour's time before we had to take off, a hard stop of 1 hour. And so I and another started running down the mountainside, and it wasn't 15 minutes. It was about 45 minutes before we got him. And he was paralyzed. He was trapped. And I knew immediately that getting back for that hard stop in 1 hour was going to be impossible. I picked him up in a fireman's carry and started carrying him. His weight was incredibly oppressive, especially at 13,000 feet. He probably weighed maybe 130 to 140 pounds. But it was crushing weight. It was hot. It was humid. His breath was on my neck. It was suffocating. And, by the end of 20 or 30 steps, moving up a single track mountain trail at elevation, you're literally exhausted. And then I traded him off to my partner, who was an EMT from San Diego. And he took him about another 20 steps, and then I took him 20 steps, and then the EMT took him 20 steps. And as we started carrying the man up the mountain, people started helping. First, it was 2 people, and then it was 4 people, and then it was 8. And you could literally see the villagers being awakened, almost like the girls were awakened with the earthquake. And they were awakened, and the energy was palpable, and it was going from negative to positive. This mass of people was now carrying this man up the mountain faster and faster. And again, we're at about 12, 13,000 feet. And so you're literally seeing destruction and rebirth.
Okay. So we picked this man up, and then people started joining us, and more people started joining us, and the pace got faster and faster and faster, and I got more and more tired, and I fell off the back, and I couldn't complete this job. And what happened was this bunch of young men were carrying him so fast that they kind of went up around the corner and disappeared away from me and left me alone on the mountain. And it was this incredible mixed emotion that I had. I was incredibly happy and proud that we were saving this man's life, but I had started this, and I didn't get to finish it. And I wasn't there for the backslapping and the handshakes. And I laid down on the ground and I fell asleep, and I woke up a few hours later, I think. It was dark, and what woke me up was a helicopter flying overhead and a bunch of cheering way up on the mountain, and they had clearly rescued this man. And I felt incredibly alone, to be quite honest with you. I walked up another 2 miles or so up the trail to where the refugee camp was, and there were many, many little campfires in this cirque on the mountain with the big white massif of Annapurna in the background in the dark. And I laid down my sleeping bag, and I heard this woman crying somewhere out in the darkness. And then another woman began crying. They had lost so much. And then I heard a woman start singing. And then another started singing. And then a man joined in. And pretty soon what I heard was the entire cirque around the mountain were humans singing in the nighttime. And it was one of the most beautiful and human things I'd ever experienced. And I began thinking very deeply about what had just happened that today and my mixed emotions. When you start something like this, or if you start a business, or if you innovate something, if you start an academic department, if you're a politician, you really believe in what you're doing. And you put your entire life into that subject. You live and you breathe it, probably to the detriment of your family, probably to the detriment of friends, and you really don't care because this is so important. This is going to change things, and you know that. And then sooner or later, you start to realize that you can't do it alone, and so you bring in some very selected, trusted team members in this, and you form a unit. And they bring in their own talent, and they breathe some life into this thing, and this thing starts to gain these words that we say in entrepreneurship called traction, movement. And it begins to take a life of its own. And sooner or later, what happens in the entrepreneur's life and the tech person's life is this thing becomes much bigger than you, than your original idea. And you're going to have to give some of that up. And there comes this series of exchanges of ego and ownership, and you say, but I started that. That's the way that I wanted it to be. And they're going to look at you and say, but that's not the way it is now. And so there's this transition in the way we think about what we create. And what we have to realize is it's much bigger than you. So as we close this talk and open this meeting, I'll leave you with this thought. This is not a technology conference. What we talk about in the next 48 hours is a legacy conference. The things we talk about, the things we create, the things you go home with and start are going to go on long after you're gone. And so we have to build the foundations the right way, the ethical way, the human-centric way. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be alive in this moment. I hope you are too. I'm honored to be here. I can't wait to hear your good thoughts and your good words over the next 48 hours. I can't wait to see them come to fruition over the next 48 years. And I hope that we truly meet this incredible moment together. Thank you very much.